Are you what you might call like a garden warrior? Do you get excited about springtime and summer and go out and dig?
Actually, it's funny you should mention that. Like, as soon as we're done, I've got some gardening things I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes, I have a little list of things. So I'm going to start working my way through them on this long weekend.
Yeah, that's my wife and I were talking last night and how excited we are to have this long weekend so we can get a lot of work done.
Yeah, I know. Funny, isn't it?
It's a good kind of work, though.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice to be able to stand back and look at something you've accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
Done.
As always, yeah.
So, Marc, you what about the Pride parades on this year? We talked a little bit about that last time we talked.
Yeah, that's right. We did. Yeah, it's interesting. So I have to make a confession here, and that is that I only just listened to my interview, which you sent me the link for it. Like, actually, I listened to it within the last 2 hours.
That's fine, because that's what's so fun about the delay, because by the time it comes around, it's new to both of us.
Yeah, there you go. So I listened to it because I was thinking, like, I don't want to repeat myself, or I don't want to contradict myself, which would be even worse, right? So so I listened right way through it, and of course we talked a bit about the Pride Parade right at the end, and at that time I wasn't sure if it was happening this year, and it turns out that it absolutely is, and so yes, so... This I'm sure won't go out until after the parade because it's only next week. But I'll be sharing like information on the Bagpipes Facebook page. But yes, so by the time anyone hears this, it will have been an outstanding success. I'm sure of it.
Surely, and is that the best way if people are interested in either seeing how that goes or even talking to you about joining in sometime? Is it best to just look you up on Facebook?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, given that it'll already be too late for 2022, but assuming that 2023 is a go, anyone listening to this later who's interested in becoming involved because they're really sad that they missed it this year, they should jump over to the Pride Pipers Facebook page and just either post or send a message, and we'll get back to you. Yep.
Cool. I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes if anybody wants to just click on that. But just Pride Pipers. You're the only Pride Pipers that I've seen out there. You got the names. So
I know, right? We talked about that. Yes. Yeah. So yes, by all means, we're always happy to have anybody who wants to be involved. Yeah, mm-hmm. Very good.
Well, we kind of have an agenda for this one more than usual, which isn't saying much. There's usually not an agenda at all. So we have a single bullet pointed list here. We want to talk about what it means to be a pipe sergeant, how to do it good and how to do it bad, and any thoughts you have about pipe sergeanting. Maybe first though, give me a quick little rundown again of when have you been in leadership positions in a band before? What you're doing right now with your band. Tell me about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess So the high level thing is that I was the pipe sergeant of the Wasatch District Grade 4 pipe band, and then briefly Grade 3. For I suppose it was well over 10 years, 12, 30. Yeah. I think when we formed the Grade 4 band out of what remained of the original Wasatch band. Because they got moved into Grade 3. Mm-hmm. That was in 2007. And so at that point, they started a replacement Grade 4 band, and they picked Doug Hunter, who some of your listeners will probably know, to be the pipe major. And they asked me to be the pipe sergeant, which thinking back on it was a kind of a risky move, I guess, because I was fairly new to the band and fairly new to piping, really, so I didn't know too much about what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
However, they asked me if I would, and I said sure. And then so Doug and I stayed as that team for quite a while. So then, of course, what happened is that various pipe majors, cycled in and out of the band because of changing needs and personal things. And Doug decided he was done with being a pipe major. He'd done it for 6 or 7 years and wanted a break. So then we replaced him with Andrew Morrill. So I was his pipe sergeant. And then later on, we had the same upgrade process where the band got moved into Grade 3. And so then I was pipe sergeant with Jeff Henderson. And then we went sort of back to... that band didn't really have the sufficient membership to make a go of it. So we reverted back to Grade 4, briefly pipe sergeant again with Andrew. At this point, though, we've cycled out I'm now no longer a pipe sergeant, and so now we just have Eric Evenhouse who's in that
right.
role.
I was going to say, I think Eric had mentioned that to me. It's probably been, I guess the pandemic makes it weird, but I think it's been has it been 3-4 years since Eric became the pipe sergeant over there?
It's not as long as that. It was during the pandemic, I think,
see.
is how it all kind of shuffled its way around. But yeah, I think, it's I think the Wasatch in general has rotated these positions. And so my tenure as pipe sergeant of the Grade 4 was probably the longest in many ways, because we've cycled out people in leadership in all the other groups.
Has that been a proactive decision coming from the organization at times, to say, let's not burn this person out, let's switch them around, or is it usually the pipe major or pipe sergeant saying, you know what, I need a break?
I think it's the latter.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish we were, if we were that mature as an organization and we really had sort of almost an executive committee running the show that was not even just bothered with the day-to-day stuff and just looking purely musically, then maybe we would have identified that a change needed to happen sooner, or tried to figure out how to keep something in place. There's all sorts of subtleties and intricacies of running a band, especially one the size of ours.
Yeah.
That mean that after the fact you could always say, well, perhaps we should have made a change sooner, or perhaps we shouldn't have made that change so soon. But it's iterative, right? You live and you learn.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. Well, someday. And I mean, of course, so I was talking with Ross about being a pipe major recently, and it did come up that one must keep in mind that different bands have different situations, of course. Sometimes you'll have a band that the pipe major's been in the pipe major for 30 years and they love it and they're never going to change. And sometimes you have a numbers situation where that's really all you can hope for, because if the pipe major or the drum sergeant or the pipe sergeant, if anybody steps out, there is no one willing to step in, So.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we don't have unlimited resources.
Yeah.
And so, you very often it's a response to the situation you find yourself in.
Yeah.
I mean, Ross has had several stints as pipe major.
That's right.
And Justin Howland and Andrew Morrill as well. I think the three of them, between them, have led our top-level band, and we've done sort of the same thing with our other bands. We've cycled people in and out, either because they had to leave because they needed to do something else, so they didn't quite have the time, or perhaps more optimally it would be if you felt that somebody would benefit from having some time in that role, which I think would be the ideal scenario in some ways. For example, Eric's a good case in point here. Looking back, it seems like I perhaps shouldn't have clung on to what I was doing for quite as long, and maybe suggested that someone else take a turn.
Oh, because kind of get a chance to step into there.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you build a more resilient organization if you have multiple people. There's more redundancy, right? If you have multiple people who can do these things, then if someone gets sick or if there's ever an issue, then that person can just jump right in, right? So I think that's probably desirable.
Redundancy as well as sympathy, right? If you've got players in the circle who have been in that position, then they might be better members of the organization and more supportive to the people currently in those positions, because they know what it's like, the pressures, the things that they're worrying about, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think it can only be a good thing. And so, there's not going to. I'm going to keep referring to Eric because at this point I'm now no longer a pipe sergeant, but I'm in the band, right? So
yeah.
So understanding what it means to do that role, I can relax and sort of become just a regular core player. But I can also, if Eric needs any assistance, he comes to me first, and so then we'll often just jump out to the back and have a quick huddle about what's needed here, and then we go back and so I think we've now got a good team going.
Yeah, so, that's interesting too. You kind of start building a support group for whoever's currently in the position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like it's pretty non-typical. If you're going to have one person who sticks around a long time, I feel like it's usually going to be the pipe major. Do you feel like there were any special benefits to having sort of the constant be not the pipe major, so that then as pipe majors rotated through, you had someone else who had already been there?
Yes, I would say so. I think in our case, I think that was true. There's always been a lot going on in Wasatch, and so to have at least some things that you don't have to think too hard about organizationally is, I think, a good thing.
Yeah.
So, and I tried to bring as much stability as I could, to the role.
I wonder, maybe it'll be useful to just lay out a couple of blanket disclaimers real quick. One of which would like kind of recognizing that every band and every iteration of every band is going to have its own extenuating circumstances, and so no ideas are going to be perfectly applicable to all bands. And another would be that every human does things a little differently, and different doesn't have to mean one is better than the other. And so there will be things that you did that Eric does differently, and that doesn't necessarily mean that one is better than the other, simply that you're different humans. And so, of course, he did some things differently, and that's to be expected. Really, it's a good thing.
100% agree. Yeah, that's my sort of desire, I guess, or that I wouldn't try to kind of impose my will, especially after the fact, and then and also that yes, that it's horses for courses, right? Every band is different, and you have to. Everybody has different resources available to them, so you have to kind of do the best you can. But I'm hoping that maybe this will be helpful, this interview, because if we talk about specifics, then maybe other people will hear that and jump in with theirs. Have you interviewed other pipe sergeants or specifically about that?
This is the first time, and that's kind of my hope with this is to precisely be able to talk to so many pipe majors and pipe sergeants and drum sergeants, both currently in those positions and retired, if you with air quotes, enough of them to create like a cacophony where if I only talked to two, then if they disagreed on something, then it would be like, well, there's some disagreement, right? But if I talk to 8 or 12 or 100, then it becomes more of a, oh, look at, here's some ideas, and kind of becomes a buffet that people can listen to and go, I like that idea. I'm not going to do that. I tried that once. It didn't work, but this works for me, that kind of thing.
I think that would be ideal. Yeah. That's the ideal scenario. Yeah.
Well, so help me break this untested ground gracefully. What comes to mind if I were to come to you and say, well, hey man, I was just made the pipe sergeant in my pipe band. Do you have any initial advice you would give me?
Yes, I think I would. So
assuming I'm extremely receptive, I'm like very much looking, like this is an ideal situation.
Yeah. So I think that probably the best advice that I would know how to give would be to be as good a communicator as you can. In other words, keep the lines of communication as open as you possibly can. So when I became pipe sergeant of Wasatch and Doug Hunter became the pipe major, neither of us had done anything like that before. All we'd done is watch other people do it.
And did this happen on the same day? You both came into those positions at the same time?
I think it did. It wasn't sort of a very cut and dried point in time, and to be honest, the band that they formed in the wake of the grade 3's upgrade was quite small, so it wasn't like we were put in charge of a huge thing. There were maybe a half a dozen or so people in it. But we did have to talk with each other about what we should do. And so we spent a lot of time talking, and I think that's probably one of the keys is that the pipe major and the pipe sergeant should be talking to one another a lot.
Now, tell me a little bit about how that looked. Did you have like a text conversation constantly happening, a lot of emails back and forth, formally setting up weekly meetings, going on hikes together on the weekends? Like, what did this look like?
I didn't go on hikes with Doug, but I did. I went to his house, or he would come over here. We talked in person. We would carve out times before or after band practice to kind of talk about what was working and what wasn't. And even if all it was us scratching our heads over a shared problem that neither of us could quite understand, just talking it out usually gave us something to work with. So, I mean, that's a rather general statement to say, to have good communication. But I think, if you didn't, then that would make things very difficult. So, step one is to make sure that you've got free and open communication with your fellow leaders, I think.
This is slightly off to the side, but does Wasatch use any kind of like group messaging, calendaring, kind of like an app or a platform, Slack or Google Chats or anything like that?
Sort of. It sort of comes and goes a little bit. There was an attempt to use Slack a while back. I think some people jumped into it. I think that actually what happens is that what has happened, I think, is the various corps have used certain things like that amongst themselves or within corps. Maybe
not organization-wide.
But not organization-wide. Right. And there's often not too much that we have to say that would apply to absolutely everybody anyway. So we do a certain amount of email. Yeah, so those kind of electronic communications, I suppose, yes, I'd be texting with individuals, but using probably, email for most things that aren't urgent.
Yeah. Now, do you feel like you pretty regularly had like these when you would set aside time to talk before and after practice, for example, which is a great idea, 'cause since everybody's getting together anyway, just show up 15 minutes early or stick around a little late.
Yeah.
Was it very often that you were showing up with an agenda, or was it more like, here are a couple things I've been thinking about, what have you been thinking about? I'm just, again, we're not saying like this is absolutely the way everybody should do it. I'm just curious I want to get as much of a look inside how things have happened for you as possible,
Right, sure, yes. Okay, so at the beginning, when we didn't really know each other very well, all of that stuff was sort of establishing kind of a personal relationship.
That's where you should have gone on some hikes, right? Go do some cheese tasting or something.
Yeah, something like that. Well, beer tasting, I guess, is what we did do. But yeah, so we did some stuff like that. And but then as you get more into the nitty gritty of it, what we would often do actually is we would make recordings of band practice.
Oh yeah.
And then we would sort of review them separately, and then what we would talk about is kind of what our thoughts were on what we heard.
Oh.
So that, I guess, my second highest thing that I would mention would be to be a good musical listener is very important, especially as the pipe sergeant, because you often the pipe major is usually leading the group, and as pipe sergeant you have the opportunity to kind of step out and listen. And so I did a lot of listening. I listened to our recordings. I listened to and then Doug and I would talk at length about what we heard and what we thought was the root of that particular problem. Like, were people actually going too fast, or were they just making lots of mistakes that made it sound like they were going too fast?
So kind of comparing notes on what you're hearing there.
Yeah, so it's quite diagnostic, actually.
Yeah.
And then, in the same manner, actually, we used to have sessions where at the end of the year, when we were getting ready to pick music for the next year, sort of brainstorming sessions, trying to figure out what tunes would play well with each other and how to put together the sets that we were going to play.
Sure.
And so quite a bit of sort of critical assessment of tunes and whether they were suitable.
Now, I want to make sure I'm being diplomatic here. Let's not leave out the drummers. Were you pulling a drum sergeant into these conversations as well?
Initially, we did not. And that was a mistake. But
let's say it's called a lesson learned, right?
Yeah, so we did. That was definitely a lesson learned. It took a while to also then expand that leadership kind of conversation to include the drum sergeant as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that was just purely down to our inexperience. It's and as I've listened more, I get a much better appreciation of how the drum scores mesh with the pipe scores, and how drumming in general meshes with piping. So you become a little bit better able to notice features that are helpful.
A little more of an ear for ensemble, huh?
Definitely. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's surprising how complex this endeavor is.
Yeah.
Because even when you only have a handful of pipers and a handful of drummers standing in a circle playing tunes, there's a huge amount of complexity to it. It turns out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things to wrangle all at once.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why you're even just. It's such a simple thing, but like I've never done it. The suggestion that you would regularly gather a recording from practice or from rehearsal rather, and review it, and then talk about it together. It's like, well, of course, when you're standing in the circle, a big chunk of your brain is going to be taken up by what you're doing.
Exactly.
And so then it's in that review afterward that you can actually listen to the whole ensemble and get more of an overall view. How's the band sounding?
Yes. Yeah. That was a long transition for me. It took a long time to get to the point where I could actually listen to the whole band sort of more objectively.
Yeah.
And not just as I kind of experienced it in the moment.
I can see that being a big benefit from discussing it between the two of you as well before sort of like bringing feedback to the band. Like I certainly have made mistakes before where my perception of what was happening was not accurate, and so then when I would speak to it, it really was going out into the air and not doing any good. You know what I mean? Because it was like I very much had blinders on, figuratively.
Yeah, and I think I'm a fairly analytical person anyway, and so that was, I guess, a personal skill that I brought to the role.
Now you also have a pretty long, like a lifelong background of sort of like being in technical music, and so I wonder what so many of us are coming to bagpipes or pipe band drumming. This is our first experience with music. Many of us do this in adulthood, and so it might be that a pipe sergeant comes into this and wants to listen and does listen, but doesn't know what they're listening for. You know, do you feel like you have a background in music, but not necessarily as long of a background in bagpipes? That's something that's a bit newer to you. Do you feel like you have found any practices or courses or resources that have been useful to you in figuring out what a pipe band should sound like, so you know what you're going for when you listen to those recordings?
Yes, yeah. And in fact, so I also listen to the top bands a lot. And I don't just listen to them for enjoyment, although it's always enjoyable. I listen to them to see if I can figure out, like, so here's, in other words, that's sort of our benchmark, right? So if you listen to somebody like Field Marshal Montgomery playing a medley, or Inverary and District playing an MSR, that's pretty much like how an MSR or a medley ought to be played. So, whatever you can derive from that is going to be helpful. And now you're not going to be able to show up and make, Wasatch or Garden Valley or whatever suddenly sound like Field Marshal.
Yeah,
but of course, but what you are going to be able to do though is listen to what works musically and why it works. And so I guess that those are, I think, all those recordings that exist of these good bands playing, especially in recent years, are, I think, a huge resource. I think anyone in leadership should be listening to those with sort of a very critical ear and saying, well, why is it that sounded so good? And what was it about it that was really good? And how can we translate that to our group of people who, like you say, maybe have come to this quite lately, and they're sort of perhaps they don't really understand the context because they're brand new learners, so they don't even know what kind of goes on out there in the pipe band world. So it becomes, I guess, an educational endeavor. So you have to not only educate all of your members or explain to them what they ought to be doing technically to be better, but also explain to them what a bagpipe band ought to sound like, and why.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing. It's like this infinite drilling down in getting more and more specific, isn't it? Because it's not just like, here, this sounds good, doesn't it? Let's sound like that. You got to go another step and go, here's why it sounds good. And then you got to go another step and go, here's how we get to sounding, here's how we do the why to get to the sounding good.
Exactly, yeah. And so, as someone in leadership, people in the rest of the group are looking to you to lead. And so what they want from you is something actionable.
That's a good point. You don't want a pipe sergeant to say to you, go home and practice. You want him to say,
it doesn't mean anything.
Here's the thing to work on this week.
Yes.
Here are the measures, or here's the exercise, or whatever it is.
Yeah, that sounded really good, or that sounded really bad, without any sort of context to why it did or didn't. And so I think that to be as specific as possible is always helpful. And as you mentioned, especially since so many people in piping maybe don't have a big musical background anyway. So if you can give musical context to it by whatever means necessary, I think that helps people have a better understanding of what they're doing.
Yeah. Recently, in Garden Valley, we've been talking about maybe using, all pipe bands are strapped for cash all the time, right? Especially because we haven't been able to do parades for a couple years. But when there are funds available, and trying to figure out what the smartest investment is, of course you need reeds and mallets and all that kind of stuff. But we've been talking about, like, if there's money available, maybe one thing we ought to consider is providing education for the leadership people. Getting them a subscription to Dojo University or Rhythm Monster or something like that, hoping that then as they learn these cool things, it gets disseminated into the band.
We've done the same thing. We've had the same conversations, and I don't remember if at the moment we're doing this, but I know that I think we did make some funds available to certain of our members in leadership to do exactly what you just said. And a lot of our members are doing that on their own as well. I think that's actually true of many members in bands up and down the Wasatch Front, who, for example, have private tuition from people like Jack Lee, for example, or Bob Worrell. You know, like you couldn't take a lesson from anybody better than those people, right? And so if multiple members of your band are getting that kind of very, very high level of tuition, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
But to your point, I'm not sure if I'd be interested to know if anybody's taking lessons, so to speak, in leadership, because that's an interesting thought. I wonder what would happen if I contacted Jack Lee and said, Jack, what I'd like to have lessons with you, but not piping lessons.
Right.
I'd like to get pipe sergeant lessons, because of course, you know, he's the pipe sergeant, the epitome of the pipe sergeant of excellence, right? He's the pipe sergeant of the Simon Fraser University band, and sort of one of the best pipers who's ever lived, essentially.
Yeah.
So that would be an interesting endeavor, I think. I wonder if he'd be up for it.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. It came up briefly when I was talking with Ross, and that like he was like, well, you know, shoot, if somebody came to me and said, I want to learn how to play pipes better, but I also want to be a better pipe major, I'd gear my lessons toward that. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. Are people doing this? You know, is this a thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people out there who could, I would argue. So yeah, it's I mean, we've in the past, we in Wasatch, and I know other bands have done the same thing. They bring in these people to do workshops, for example.
Right. Yeah, I hear the Chanter boys talk all the time about how they bring Stuart Little in pretty frequently.
Yeah. I think you know, Jack Lee, just since I mentioned him, he's been to Utah numerous times to probably all the different bands. I think at this point, I think that the Salt Lake Scots have brought him in. I know we have, and then. I think maybe the Utah Pipe Band did one time also. You know, he's probably getting sick of coming here.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think there is definitely an appetite for those nuggets of knowledge. And, you know, and why wouldn't you, if you can see someone who's really had a very successful career doing this, that you would want to find out as much about it as you could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I've heard too. Mike Swan works with Andrew Douglas, and he's mentioned he did some stewarding for one of these things that Piper's Dojo did. They're like pipe majors clinics or forums or something like that, where it's kind of more of a group thing with limited seats.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So that maybe we can see more of that kind of stuff popping up. That'd be useful.
I could see that happening. Yes, I think that, you know, as soon as everybody had internet access and sort of pipers and the top pipers realized it, they immediately sort of hung out their shingle, right, and started giving lessons.
Yeah.
But now, lots of people are doing that. But yeah, I think this could be the next thing. That's you know, it's now more of a knowledge sharing, in a wider sense. Could start occurring.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the Chanter boys, I have heard them talk often about having kind of a good cop, bad cop kind of vibe between the pipe major and pipe sergeant. Do you feel like that's a dynamic that's ever come up in your experience, whether you were in that position or you've witnessed it? Do you feel like that's useful? I'm not. I should be clear. Not that I think they couldn't take it. I'm not saying criticize the Las Vegas pipe band. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just, you know, I can imagine, you know, maybe this is a good way to approach it. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts? Any experiences with that?
I think probably. So, if in any given scenario, if that were the case, I would probably always be the good cop. Just saying. But I think that, you know, during my tenure with Doug. Doug was the kind of straight-talking person who you might have described himself as a bad cop. His nickname. So what people don't know about Doug maybe is that he used to do a lot of Mountain Man stuff and go to Mountain Man gatherings.
Yeah, I've heard that, but I don't know.
Okay, I guess when you do that, you have a Mountain Man name, and his name was the Badger.
Oh, was it?
Because and that was because, in his words, he was an ornery so and so, you know, I think that what he and I developed was probably a sort of good cop, bad cop kind of approach to running the band.
I heard this kind of dynamic maybe is better referred to as like Mama Papa or
maybe
or something like hard and soft. I don't know. It's not. There's another way that's more applicable. But yeah. Go on.
I mean, we didn't set out to do that.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't set out to do that. I mean, that's just the people we are. Doug knows what he wants, and he's very direct and clear about it. And so what I would then do is, and most of the time that works really well actually, especially with sort of a more regimented approach, which you kind of have to have when you've got all these people, you're trying to make them play and sound exactly the same. Sometimes though, there are certain people for whom that approach doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
Because they just push back against it, or it doesn't mean something to them. And so then I would have to be the sort of person who would keep an eye out for that. And if it was obvious it wasn't quite kind of hitting the mark, then I would kind of run around the back and sort of fill in the gaps, I guess. So it wasn't like they were complementary approaches, right? Yeah. It wasn't either good or bad. We weren't, like 1 minute berating the band and the next minute kind of complimenting them. It was more of a kind of we covered all the bases by doing it that way. Mm-hmm. And that was how we did it with Doug and me. But once Doug decided to step away from it and Andrew Morrill took his place, then I had to sort of re-establish that relationship again. And I wouldn't describe Andrew as a bad cop in his approach to
no,
band
he's
running.
such a relaxed person. I can't imagine him being in any way mean.
No, and to be clear, Doug was never mean.
Right, like, you're right.
So
these words are not very precise for what we're talking about, are they?
Yeah, but he was more of a strict kind of disciplinarian. I would say than I am. Now, once I was working with Andrew, then it almost actually seemed like it flipped a little bit, right? So I was the one saying, this specific thing is just wrong. Like you're playing this with the exact wrong rhythm, and you need to figure that out.
Yeah, and this is like, as long as everybody at the table is on the same page, we have limited time, we're here to find the problems and uproot the problems. So the most efficient way to do that is say, there's the problem, and point right at it. So this isn't anybody being mean, or at least it shouldn't be. I suppose there's potential for a really bad approach, right? Somebody might say, hey, that was horrible, you're really bad at this. There's no need for that kind of stuff. But to point at a problem and say, this is what we need to fix, is not equivalent to being a mean or a bad cop, These words aren't exactly what we're looking for, are they? Right.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. But I think most people have a fairly good idea of what a good cop, bad cop approach might be.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's a useful tool in the sense that it makes sense to people, and and I think that we each sort of pairing that I've been part of, and actually I must bring the drummers back in again because I keep forgetting to do that. But yes, during that time, I've also worked with we rotated a lot of drum sergeants for a while there during the time that Doug and I were running the show. But we kind of settled on one person eventually, and then since then it's always been just a couple of different, I guess 2 or 3 different drum sergeants that I've worked with. But that once again is an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it is a little different. In that they are, of course, we're all members of the band, but between the pipe major and pipe sergeant, you both are on the same instrument. And so then you got the drummers on other instruments, not just often. So, usually it's a snare. I don't think it has to be that way, but, it's not just one on different instrument. It's the whole, the midsection and the snares too.
Yeah. An ensemble is something that's come along, like the ability to kind of gauge ensemble has taken much longer for me.
Yeah.
And actually, so speaking specifically then, say from a pipe sergeant point of view, I don't know I think most bands configure their band about the same, physically speaking, which is to say that in the circle, you kind of have a triangle formed by the pipe major, the pipe sergeant, and the drum sergeant.
Yeah, certainly. With
the sort of bass drum kind of in the middle. And what it means is that, for me anyway, as pipe sergeant, what I found was that it was a really good spot to be, because I could equally well see the pipe major and the drum sergeant. And so it took a while, but now when I play, even though I'm no longer the pipe sergeant, I'm still watching them both, almost equally, actually.
But, oh man, that is exactly the kind of habit, there you go, this is another reason why we would want a lot of membership to rotate through these positions, right? Because if you spend a few years thinking hard about that, about connecting the pipe major to the pipe sergeant as you play too, if everybody in the circle's doing that, that you're going to be right on.
It's interesting because it's understood, right, that the pipe major is probably watching the drum sergeant for the most part, and then they're expecting everybody to watch them. But the pipe sergeant, the way I interpreted that role actually was to sort of keep an equal eye on both, because very often after we were done playing and then we would huddle, the conversation between the pipe major and the drum sergeant would be very different from what I had seen.
Interesting.
And so that's where I would kind of bring in like a little bit more of a sort of outsider perspective from that, like that linkage that you have between the lead drummer and the lead piper.
Did you ever feel like you were a tiebreaker? Like,
one
had the idea and the other had the other idea, and you were like, well, actually, guys.
Sometimes, or like or maybe I would represent each to the other.
Yeah.
So yes, yeah. So if if say Andrew was very insistent on a thing, but I could see that it was from my perspective it was a little different, then I could maybe kind of represent the drummers a little bit to him.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Become a sort of a diplomat. I suppose.
Right. Yeah. Do you feel like you witnessed in your experiences when you kind of did that sort of like that approach shift based on what the current pipe major's approach was? Do you feel like you witnessed the same thing coming from pipe majors as well? Like, is this a dynamic that happens between the two and then the three people really in leadership positions or more, depending on the band, where everybody gets a feel for where everybody is at? Or do you feel like it might be an especially useful skill for a pipe sergeant to have that in mind so they can kind of fill the gaps that might be left?
It might be. I mean, I try to be the neutral third party, I think, a little bit. I mean, I'm a piper, so I'm thinking about piping a lot, but to try to make sure that what I was really thinking about was ensemble.
Yeah.
It probably depends on the band, right? Once again, sure. It also depends on the size of the group, because that approach becomes more important when you have a very large band. So if band sizes kind of go up and down, right? We've experienced this in Wasatch. We've gone from, sometimes I've played in a group in Wasatch that had 20 plus pipers in it.
What a big sound,
which is crazy. It's big, right? But other times then it's dwindled and we're down to the minimum, right? 6, 7 pipers.
Yeah.
So what works for one size group doesn't necessarily work or translate to a different size group.
Yeah.
So I guess I've learned to listen differently depending on the size of the group we're playing with. Because if you have 20 pipers, there's actually it's very unlikely that the pipe major is going to be able to hear everything.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
And so therefore, it's quite important to have somebody else sort of stationed some distance away that can kind of triangulate.
Yeah,
for you.
When dealing with a group that size, it might even be beneficial to consider finding someone to fill the not always present role of pipe corporal to bring yet another person into.
That's a good point. Yes, yeah. The more ears you have, and maybe that's what I'm doing now because I'm not pipe sergeant anymore. But there's Eric, myself, there's Andrew, and currently we have Matt Biggs as our lead drummer. So the all of us can listen together and sort of try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Does it sound right? Yep.
Yeah. Have you found that there's often a splitting up of duties, like at rehearsal as well as competition, where the pipe sergeant ends up either moving the tape or playing for tape to be moved when tuning, or other stuff like that? Is there kind of a set of sort of duties that fall to the pipe sergeant?
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we definitely have developed that over the years in Wasatch, and I've noticed by watching other bands that not everybody does it exactly the same.
Yeah.
But the way we do it is the pipe major does the chanters.
Meaning the pipe major plays and people tune to the pipe major's chanter?
Correct, and the pipe major is the only one who moves tape.
Oh, interesting. So they're doing all of it. They don't have a third person on their knees there in between the two chanters destroying their hearing as they move.
Right, no, we don't have a third person doing chanters. And that's across all of our bands, actually. Now I think about it, yeah, it was kind of already in place anyway, right back at the very beginning when we only had one band. But then it sort of got more formalized, I think, probably during the time period that Ross and Justin Howland went to play with Triumph Street for a year or two.
Yeah.
Because a large grade 1 band needs to have a very efficient means of tuning a band quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was one of the invaluable skills that Ross especially learned from his time up there, was how to move around a band very fast and very quickly get people's chanters ready. And if you look at the grade 1 bands, I think pretty much only the pipe major moves tape around, as I think about what I'm seeing. It's pretty rare. Even bands with a very skilled pipe sergeant, they might do a little bit of adjustment. I guess watching SFU, I think Jack Lee does maybe run around some of the circle tuning that way. But the way we've done it in Wasatch anyway is that the pipe sergeant is responsible for tuning drones, with a backup if needed.
Like someone to hold the tuner for you or something like that?
Well, if the band's too big to get round quickly enough, then you have a second person tuning drones, right? But so it would be, when I was pipe sergeant, it was Eric was the backup, right? So we would basically each take a tuner and go opposite directions around the band and meet up in the middle.
On the other side.
So that would get the band tuned drones like twice as fast.
That's a really good point. My wife often laughs at me and us as a piping community that we say we play instruments, but really so much of what we do is tuning instruments. And like so much of the results on competition day are like, well, how did the tuning go before you even got into the circle?
Very much so. Yes, yeah. It's a big part of it.
It can be frustrating too, right? When you get together at a rehearsal and what you want to do is play the material, but you sometimes feel like you're stuck between either not enjoying it very much because you didn't take the time to tune perfectly and so because you wanted to get right to the material, or eating up so much rehearsal time with tuning that you don't have much time left for actually rehearsing. And so finding ways to make that more efficient, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and we have definitely benefited from that. So watching how quick Ross is at tuning. Andrew's pretty quick too. I think I would argue Ross is probably faster at tuning than Andrew is. But
we should set up a competition next time we have some kind of like gathering, with the local Westpaba district. We'll set them up. We'll give them each 6 pipers and see who can get to the end of the line.
That's
first.
right. Yeah, just take all the tape off their chanters and then say, "There you go." Right? So that would be an interesting competition. I think So if you. So there's various components to this, but you're absolutely right. People get together to play because they want to play. They don't want to listen to their person next to them get tuned for 20 minutes, right? They just want to start playing. So we've done a whole bunch of things within the band to try to shorten that curve as much as possible. So having the same people tune drones each time, each have the same tuner, we each have the same procedure that we always do. So it becomes very habitual. So it can be accomplished very quickly. And we also have, made sure that the band members understand that they have a band chanter that they don't touch during the interim period when between rehearsals.
Yeah.
And not giving away any trade secrets here, but we also started using tone protectors. Which are those things that keep your reed at a constant humidity.
Now. When you say they don't touch their chanters, does that mean they don't move tape on their band chanter, or do they not play their band chanter?
No, they play it, but they don't adjust it.
Right, gotcha.
And so if it sounds wonky, then I guess that's too bad. It shouldn't sound wonky because unless your reed did something bad during the week, then it should sound pretty much the same all the time. Like it wouldn't, and then. That way, on a Thursday when we have band practice, then that's your opportunity to get tweaked back into alignment with everybody else, kind of thing. And the use of those tone protectors has been great because it means
so those have been good, huh?
Oh, amazing! It's that also it shortens the time greatly because you don't have to spend a long time playing at the beginning of rehearsal. Because pretty much everybody's reed is already at the sort of stable equilibrium that it was when you left off playing last time.
Have you been using those long enough to have a feel for if they affect the longevity of the reed? Because being in this dry climate here in Utah, I have wondered if having my reed get real wet while I play and then real dry when I don't, just every day back and forth, if that
like a cycling.
Right. I've wondered if that might maybe my reeds would last longer if they stayed in a constant state instead of going back and forth.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I haven't actually been monitoring that, but it wouldn't be hard to, I guess. As a band, we buy a lot of reeds, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so I think the way we could probably tell if we suddenly discovered that we didn't have to buy reeds as often collectively,
you could just
right?
Look at the record
because
of purchases, huh?
yeah, because individual pipers, it might not be very clear on a piper to piper basis, but if you are buying 8 dozen reeds, and you're having to do that on a regular basis, that's a big financial outlay. So I guess if preventing the reeds from humidity cycling quite so much, you play them till they get wet, then they dry out between playing. The tone protectors mean they never quite dry out like that, and I don't think some people might think that mold could be a problem, but I haven't heard anybody report that it is. I think actually it's possible that those little packets have
some kind of
something in them.
antifungal or something.
I think it's possible. Yeah, I can't remember, to be honest, but I personally found it so much easier. Especially we talked last time about doing funeral gigs and things like that. When you get to a place, you never quite know how soon you're going to have to play.
Yes, so true.
Because people arrive at random times. Sometimes they arrive early. So knowing that when I get there, I'm likely only to need to play for a few minutes to be completely ready to go is really nice. So,
that's the last straw for me. I'm gonna get one of these, some kind of humidity control system. 'Cause I rolled at the last funeral I played. I rolled up and they were already there. I was a half hour early and they were already there. And they apologized. They're like, sorry, we had the wrong information, so it's not your fault. But it put me in that awkward position of tuning as I walk across the cemetery to them. It was that was not nice.
Never ideal. Yeah. So all of these things, right? I guess in terms of helping to run a band, and maybe these are the kind of my thought is always that the division of labor between the pipe major and the pipe sergeant is that the pipe major should be as much as possible entirely focused on the music.
Yeah.
And the pipe sergeant's job is to focus on everything else. As well as the music, but everything else that the pipe major doesn't have to.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I'm saying, well, the pipe major is the only one who adjusts tape, for example, but the pipe sergeant could alert the pipe major to that. Mm-hmm. So I did spend a lot of time walking around the outside of the circle trying to see if there were issues and so then that we could fix them more quickly and just be playing again.
Was that a pretty regular thing for you as pipe sergeant, that just during rehearsal, kind of at random when it felt right, you just kind of stop playing and step out and walk around, so then the pipe major can keep everybody going through the medley, but you're taking notes as you go around?
Very much so. I made it over the years. I made it more and more my habit to do that.
Did you ever get a clipboard so that the players, it's like you could also acclimatize the players to having a judge breathing down their neck?
No, I didn't do that, but I should have. That would have been a good idea.
Exposure therapy, right?
Yeah. No, I would do that a lot. And actually, so I also, when we would go occasionally to Enumclaw, because Simon Fraser University would often be there, I would actually shadow Jack Lee. He didn't know I was shadowing him, but I would basically, when we weren't playing, I would go over to SFU's area, especially when they were practicing, and watch what Jack did. Because I figured that whatever he did is probably what I ought to be doing.
Yeah.
So as he would be going around and he does a lot of listening. If you've ever watched, he listens just so attentively. It's incredible. So I kind of took that approach, the same approach myself. It seemed like I figured that if Jack Lee is doing that, then I probably should be too. So I would spend a lot of time walking around the outside of the circle trying to listen to what it sounded like overall and sort of piper by piper as well.
I feel like as we're talking, the thing that's distilling in my mind is that a simple, a one-sentence job description for a pipe sergeant might be fill the gaps. Whether that's in personality and approach or just these utilitarian, this thing needs done. I'll go do this thing. I'll take care of it.
Yes. Yeah, I very much so. Yeah. Yeah. So the focus of the pipe major should be as much as possible music.
Yeah.
To the limit possible, it should be just music. And then the pipe sergeant kind of picks up all those other gaps. But yeah, and in fact, so Eric, I think, has done an excellent job of this since he's become pipe major, much better than I did. He does a lot more. He sends out emails to the band, just general emails, work on your pipes, or make sure you do the following maintenance. he makes sure everybody knows if there's a rehearsal change of location, for example, or if anything else needs to get out there. He's very good at that, and so that's the other thing. So the pipe major doesn't have to think about that.
So you mentioned having open lines of communication. Maybe the pipe sergeant is also making sure that those lines are open for everybody, not just between themselves and the pipe major and the drum sergeant. I mean, I can imagine that, like, then if a piper or a drummer has something come up, or they need to talk to somebody about something, whether it's an HR thing or just a logistics thing, whatever it is, if they've got this person, the pipe sergeant, who's communicating with them weekly at least over the last 4 or 5 years, they're going to be more comfortable, and it's going to be easier to be like, hey man, hey pipe sergeant, here's this thing, rather than having leadership be unapproachable.
Exactly. In fact, as you were talking there, I was just getting ready to say that the pipe sergeant is a little bit like the HR department as well.
I should just shut up and let you talk, man.
Well, no, the opposite. I think that over the years, and this goes back to sort of the good cop, bad cop approach. I don't know if the pipe sergeant is the good cop, whoever is the good cop, I suppose. But if the pipe sergeant is the good cop, so called, then maybe the membership are likely to come to them first and say, "Hey, I'm having this problem, for whatever reason," and then the pipe sergeant can sort of go and break the news to the pipe major.
Yeah.
If what I'm saying is true, and if the pipe major should only be concerned with music, right? I mean, that's not always going to be the case. For example, like you said, like pipe majors who've sort of inherited a band or brought it up, and it's very much like their band. That's a different dynamic, very different dynamic.
Yeah.
So maybe you wouldn't need to have something like that in an organization which is perhaps more of almost like a family feel to it, or it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for every situation, I guess.
Right. Yeah, there definitely are bands that are more organization based, and there are others that are more human based, like an individual person based.
Yeah. We've had to respond to in Wasatch, because we are highly organization based. We've got like people from all over. We even mentioned this in the last interview, right? That there are people in the band I don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
So given that, then there needs to be structures in place that keep things running smoothly. So perhaps we've just responded because of the situation we find ourselves in.
Sure.
So we have like a path. So if any member has an issue, then they know who to talk to about it.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to playing your pipes as the pipe sergeant, do you feel like a person can successfully be a pipe sergeant without being the most proficient player? And or do you feel like there's any level of responsibility for a pipe sergeant to always have, like a solo in their back pocket in case there's a need at a performance of some kind? Is the pipe sergeant going to be one of the people who needs to be ready to fill a gap? If a playing gap in this case, if that's needed.
So should the pipe sergeant be one of the best players in the band? I certainly hope not, because I'm not. However, that said, it's probably better if your pipe sergeant is Jack Lee, right?
Well, naturally, yeah. Yeah.
However, if that can't be the case, I think that there is a trade-off, right? So probably the pipe major ought to be the best piper in the band, pretty much. I think it would be weird for that not to be the case.
Yeah. Or at least among the most proficient. They're at least going to be playing clean doublings, that kind of stuff.
If you're lucky enough to have a band packed full of very talented people, then that's great, right?
Yeah.
But assuming that's not the case, then the pipe major should probably be the most proficient piper, and the pipe sergeant probably not that far behind. But actually, I was thinking about this before the interview, because I by no means am I a very skilled solo piper, and this was brought home to me recently because Wasatch we hosted a little internal competition ahead of the competitions, the formal season. We actually set up our own solo competition just for ourselves. Just so that people could kind of get back into the swing of it before we had to go out and do like sanctioned contests. Yeah. And so I entered, and I didn't do very well.
Does that hurt more or less than in an official competition?
It was interesting. It was a data point, shall we say?
Yeah.
So I think that this speaks to the utility of trying to enter solo competitions, because it can only help, right? You get to hear how you sound on your own, because that's very important. But to your point about whether they should be the best piper or at a very high level within the band, there are some slightly different skills that have to do with playing in a band that aren't the same as being a good soloist.
Good point.
And to the point we talked about earlier about ensemble, what you're striving for is a band where the sound and the music is as blended as it possibly can be. So you don't want a circle full of soloists. You want a circle full of people who have kind of got so grooved with playing with one another that they kind of have an average, I guess, that they're playing to that. And so some of this comes with skill, because you would like everyone to be approximately as skillful to be in the same group. And then there's a big component of music choice as well, so that the music that you've picked is also at a level that pretty much everybody can play. So given that, if you're saying that the music should be playable by about everybody in the group, then perhaps it doesn't matter if somebody is much better or much less skilled than another person, as long as they can all play it.
Great point.
That said, that you're not going to have that. You're not going to suddenly have a band full of exactly average players who are all equally skillful.
Right.
So, so part of the trick is trying to figure out how to finesse that as a group. But I think So for me, I always felt like I wouldn't say the standards are lower when you're playing in a band than if you're soloing, but there's less of an eye on you specifically. So I felt like as pipe sergeant, even though I knew there was multiple players in the band who were a lot better than I was, I felt like I didn't feel like a fraud.
Oh, sure,
in that role, I didn't.
Like being in the band is about the band. It's like, how is the band doing? Is you're one part of the whole rather than being... Yeah.
So does the pipe sergeant need to be a very, very good player? I mean, of course it would help if they are, but even if they're not, there's some other skills that would make up for that.
Yeah. So I'm imagining if my hypothetical person that's just become, just accepted the invitation, or more often probably the pleading and begging to take the pipe sergeant role. And then I think to myself, all right, well, now I got to be really good because I'm going to be the pipe sergeant, so I'm going to learn some Lincoln Hilton solos. Like, by all means, learn some Lincoln Hilton solos, but maybe if I only have so much time in the day and I want to focus on some skills, maybe it's not the same as if I wanted to become a better soloist. The skills I ought to be working on are the things you've been talking about, listening to the really good bands and analyzing that and thinking about ensemble and stuff like that.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that, but I mean, maybe that's just my personal experience of it, because that's what I did. But I think that understanding that you're trying to help the band be as good as it can be is sort of is part of that role. Yeah. So as a separate track, trying to make your own piping as good as it can be, that's sort of a given. But if since I've agreed to be the pipe sergeant, I can't prioritize my own solo playing, for example, over the band's playing.
Right, you're prioritizing the band.
If you're a core member, that's just it also sort of applies. But it's kind of understood that you'll also, as member of the leadership, you want to assist all the band members in being better band members and better soloists.
Sure.
So now we're getting into other territory here, I guess, a little bit. But I guess my thought would be is that when we go to competitions, it's sort of assumed that a good chunk of the band will probably also be soloing.
Yeah.
And because can only be helpful to the band, we highly encourage that. And so as pipe sergeant, I used to make sure that the way was clear for all those core members to both solo and fully participate in the band on those days, so that we would have the best outcome either way.
What does that look like? Are you helping them get registered to solo in the preseason, helping them pick out music, helping them tune before they go compete?
Yes,
all
those things. Yes, all that. So if that meant that I couldn't solo because I was busy helping all the other core members solo, then that's what I did.
That takes priority.
Yes, that was my choice. I mean, that's how I did it. I mean, maybe you could argue that You know, a bit like when you fly on a plane, they say put your oxygen mask on first, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't actually do that. But yeah,
Get a
I
medal
ran
for yourself first.
yeah, then worry about it, or beat all of your fellow band members. And
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, although that wouldn't have happened.
That's a different approach, right? That's like an assert dominance approach or something.
Exactly, yeah. No, but so I think I haven't soloed regularly for quite a number of years, and I think the reason I always said it was sort of perhaps glibly was that it's because I was pipe sergeant and I was trying to make sure the band was as healthy as it could be on the day. Yeah. But actually, now I think about it, I think that was literally what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
So I was trying to help all the core members be ready for their solos so that they could become better players. Because if you have all your core members be better players, they're probably going to start to sound better when they come together as a band. Mm-hmm. Although that's a whole separate thing you have to tweak. But still, you know, if your feed stuff is good quality, then your ingredients are good quality, right? You're going to make better dishes. So
yeah.
So if you could lift up all your band members to be good soloists, then your band almost certainly is going to sound better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, maybe it's just painfully obvious, so it doesn't even need pointing out, but I feel like I have seen before where, like, if there's not much of a focus on soloing within a band, then it can be really easy, especially when a band is strapped for leadership, and a band is young, you know, in a lot of ways, with a lot of newish players. It can be really easy for things that could be improved to kind of, like, slip through the cracks, because there's not a lot of individual attention. You know, like once a person has their pipes, it's like, all right, hop in the circle, and they're now one among many. There's not a lot of one-on-one attention. Whereas if there's a focus on soloing, you get a little more of that sort of like, oh, let me hear your solo. How's it coming along? You know, your throws are a little bit squished. Maybe we could work on some D throws. You know, that kind of thing ends up happening more.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And you know, the flip side to this, of course, is that if it's actually quite beneficial for the other members of the band to see leadership soloing if they are. So
That's
maybe
true.
it's, you know,
That's
it's not.
by example.
Yeah, so you know, there's that too. So you know, I've been thinking more and more that I ought to get back into soloing. Mm-hmm. That's kind of why I tried it again last month. So one way or another, yeah, we're always trying to improve, but the trick is finding the best ways to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Have you guys in Wasatch, have you split up the responsibility for, like, leading the melody versus leading the harmony between pipe major and pipe sergeant? When there is harmony with the tune, I mean.
So one of the things that we've done in Wasatch, I think this is across all bands, is that typically the pipe sergeant does not play any harmonies. Mm. And the reason for that is in case they have to lead.
Oh, sure, yeah.
They'll be leading with the melody, not the harmonies, right? Yeah. Because it would be the problem is if we've drilled all our members to watch the pipe major's hands as much as possible.
Right.
And if the pipe major suddenly starts playing harmonies, then it can cause issues.
Certainly.
Because people watching the pipe major, if they're doing what they've been told,
right.
they may all end up playing the wrong notes. So we've tended to separate the harmony playing from the leadership.
I see. No, that makes sense.
I don't know if that's what all bands do. That's just what we did.
Yeah. I can see sense in that.
So as a result, I haven't played harmonies actually in anything for a number of years. So maybe now I'm not pipe sergeant anymore. I need to request.
Yeah.
Because I like playing harmonies. I always did, but now I can go back to it maybe.
Right. You got all kinds of things you can focus on. You got some you time now.
I have. That's right. Yeah. Soloing, harmonies, you name it.
Yeah. Well, what else? Is there anything else that's come to your mind as you've been thinking about how to be a good pipe sergeant, or what not to do as a pipe sergeant that might be useful?
I don't know about the do's and the don'ts. I think we've covered most of what I would have thought would be the things. You should be a good listener, be a good communicator, be a good organizer. I think the role also is that of sheepdog.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
Especially with a bigger band, on the day of competition, people can end up wandering off.
Not even just competition, rehearsal, man.
Or at any time, people wander off, right? And so, as pipe sergeant, one of your jobs is to go off and find the lost sheep and bring them back again. So, this has especially been true at games that
with
I
their
found.
pipes laying across your shoulders, right?
Yeah, with especially at games, and especially when you have teenage members of the band who get easily distracted. They wander off, right? And then suddenly it's time. You like, where is so and so? And then you have to go and find them.
There they are, looking at swords. Come here.
That's right, looking at swords. So that's sort of one of the practical matters of being a pipe sergeant, is that I took on that role as well, as so once again, so the pipe major could focus on the music, I would go and like round everybody up.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Lovely. Well, in that case, I think that we've got an episode here.
Well, that's good. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, my takeaways would be that I have an illustrious future not being a pipe sergeant coming up right now, so that's good. But I hope this was helpful, and I think it will be interesting to